Hello. Coming to you today with a review of Tirant Blanc. This is a work published in 1490, a book of chivalric adventure and romance. I should start off right off the bat. I am ignoramus when it comes to all this stuff. Like a lot of people who come to Tirant Blanc, I come to it from a mention in Don Quixote, which I'll get to in a minute. But I know nothing about the Catalan culture. I'm shaky on most of my medieval history. I shouldn't, and I'm probably going to judge this through a lens of a guy reading it in 2021. So, yes, they were different times, as they say, but I'm going to have to very much review it from my own times, and unfortunately from in my context in Canada, from very current events in my own time, shading my reading and my reflections on the work. So that said, let's get into Tirant Blanc. Why am I reading this work from 1490, published posthumously by it's Joanot Martorell, with an assist from a friend who has claimed that he actually kind of finished the work, but there seems to be now disputes. And at this point in the scholarship, it seems to be this is solely a work of Joanot Martorell that was published after his death. Who was Joanot Martorell? He was a Valencian knight. This is Valencia, part of Spain. I'm not going to go much further into that. So let's get into the work. Yes, I read this because I have been was reading Don Quixote. And in one of the early chapters of Don Quixote, chapter 6, Don Quixote's friends who have watched their friend patron seem to kind of drive himself crazy by reading too much books of chivalry, decide to burn his library. But before they and the women are all bent on just basically we're going to burn everything, but the priest and the barber say, oh no, let's at least go through the titles first. And they list a whole bunch of works. Another one, Amadeus of Gaul, is one that I read the first volume of. I read a translation by romantic poet Robert Southey. I'm probably not going to do a review of that just because the translation was not great for my modern ears. This was a translation from like the 1870s or something like that, and was really rough to read. It was interesting in the sense that it gave me a bit more of a thing of the Platonic chivalrous, kind of more straightforward book of chivalry, and it's also a great contrast with Tirant Blanc, which is a lot more wild in its telling, a lot more ribald in its telling. But they get to Tirant Blanc, and they say, she was going to take a whole bunch. The housekeeper was going to take a whole bunch and toss them out to be burned. But because she took so many together, one of them fell at the feet of the barber, who wanted to see which one it was, and saw that it was the history of the famous knight Tirant Blanc. God help me, said the priest with a great shout. Here is Tirant Blanc. Let me have it, friend, for I state here and now that in it I have found a wealth of pleasure and a gold mine of amusement. And that indeed seems to be Cervantes' kind of view of this work as a wealth of pleasure and a gold mine of amusement. Amusement is definitely a word we should come back to when we're talking about Tirant Blanc. What is Tirant Blanc? It is a classic of Catalan chivalric literature. It's as I said, it was published posthumously. This work by Joanot Martorell in 1490. It's kind of one of these early, the early kind of the actual kind of the printing stuff. It's written in the Catalan language. Catalan being one of the languages of Spain. You want to step into stuff. That's another thing you could step into. I'm just going to say Catalan language, and I'm not going to go any further than that. I am big know-nothing outsider than that. It's a book about Tirant Blanc, who answers the call by the Byzantine emperor to come and help save the Byzantine Empire. And indeed, spoiler alert, he does save the Byzantine Empire. Now that is an interesting thing, because this is written in the context of the fall of the Byzantine Empire. This is, it's, I think in the Wikipedia article I read, it's a kind of an example of an alternate history, because the Byzantine Empire in 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks. It was the end of the Byzantine Empire, and by extension, the Roman Empire before it. And while Constantinople at this point was just a little stump, it wasn't a big empire. It was just a little stump with a little bit of land, had fallen into great disrepair. They had actually had called for the the more further west, Rome and all that, to actually help them against the Ottoman Turks. Had largely been ignored. There had been some volunteers, but basically they'd been ignored. But the news of the fall of the Byzantine Empire, of Constantinople, was a big hammer blow to medieval Europe. This was, it's one of these events that people could remember. People were weeping in Rome when they heard the news about the fall of Constantinople. It's kind of akin to a 9/11 or something like that. This was a real shake to the thing of oh my God, this kind of, the Islamic Empire was making that much more inroads into the thing, and to such a storied place like Constantinople. Constantinople got its name because of Constantine the First, who was the first Roman Empire to convert to Christianity. So it's really got that kind of hooked knowledge. And this work seems to be one of these works written afterwards, which is just like an alternate thing where a great and noble knight came in and saved the empire. So that's the main thrust of the story. It opens with a weird little, what I can see now, having read other medieval works, as a thing where William of Warwick tricks his wife, or to really super tests his wife, puts his wife through a lot of trials to also protect England from, it's a little miniature thing of protecting England from Islamic invaders. So this book, and a lot of chivalric works they definitely have this kind of tinge to them of the ideology. It's a battle of ideology of, religion, of Christianity versus Islam, Muslims, and specifically the Ottoman Turks. Unfortunately, it's funny. I read this book, and then we've had a very public example of Islamophobia in the news in Canada just recently, where a guy in his 20s murdered a family of people who are very obviously Muslim family, mowed them down in the street. They were going for a walk after dinner or something like that, and this guy, apparently, all reports at this point had premeditatedly went out to kill others. And I'm reading a work from 1490 where they're othering. This is very much othering. This is very much demonizing the kind of Muslim Islamic culture. The Moors is othering them, and it's really shocking that we can go from work in 1490 to 2021, and there's different contexts, but that thing of kind of that Islamophobia, oftentimes rooted in kind of fundamentalism and kind of a right-wing Christian fundamentalism, is also there. Also white supremacy as well, obviously. So that colored that book for me. I mean, I have to say, even as I read this book, that was really obvious. In the early chapters, a kid is they capture a Moor, they kill the Moor, and they bathe the kid in the blood of this Moorish prisoner, and to make him into a great hero, to become a great warrior later. It's like literally bathing themselves in the blood of their enemy, and that these are the heroes. These are the heroes, which makes it all the more shocking. And indeed, I mean, throughout the book, it is a book about we're we're fighting off the Moorish invaders in this kind of weird alternate wish fulfillment history where we, through the smarts of Tirant LeBlanc or his great bravery are, killing Moors. But that even still goes into but there's a surprisingly large hunk of this book is also just sort of a love story, an erotic love story where, there's at one point Tirant thinks that his princess Carmenisa is cheating on him with a Moorish gardener. It actually turns out it's one of her maidens dressing up as a Moorish gardener, I guess blackface or black mask, and having kind of erotic frolics. But he thinks it's actually the Moorish gardener. He goes and he kills this guy. Cuts off his head in a blind fury rage, and that's not really ever particularly addressed. He never faces any consequences for this. It's like, oh, well, that was unfortunate, wasn't it? It's like, you murdered somebody, but it's like, no, you murdered a Moor, which obviously within this culture isn't seen as a thing. So there's that. I'm getting into all the problems or the things that, like, you read this as a modern reader and you're like, holy crap, this is horrifying. The other thing is that in his romance, Tirant LeBlanc's romance with Carmenisa, who is the princess of is the daughter of the Emperor of Byzantine. The Emperor of Byzantine, who is kind of a rather comedic fellow in himself, who seems to always be fainting whenever bad news happens, which makes for Tirant being even that greater. But he's like, you can see why it's one of these kind of implications of like, well, this is why Constantinople fell, because the actual emperor of Constantinople was a loser. But in the context of their romance, Tirant LeBlanc won't, as they say, close the deal. He's having this furtive kind of love affair, and we're not telling anyone. The maiden of Carmenisa, Placer de Mavia, her thing is, oh, well, she won't give herself to you. You have to take her. And there's basically a thing of like, you need to rape her to take her. And once you've done that, well, then she'll fall into line and she'll love you. And Tirant LeBlanc resists that advice for the longest of time, in which case he gets a whole bunch of more weird kind of adventures off into the coast of Barbary, where he has to kind of build up a whole army and conquer everything, and then back again until he finally gives in to Placer de Mavia's apparently really solid advice, which is taking Carmenisa against her will. At which point, yes, Carmenisa the next day, after being upset for a little while, loves him, and they're going to live happily ever after. But it's not, I won't spoil that part, but that doesn't even happen in this book. We have lots of sex. We have lots of fondling of breasts. This is Amadeus of Gaul is very much the chaste kind of chivalric thing, whereas this book is very much, no, we're going to go into the bedroom. No, we're going to have what seems like fairly kind of R-rated, X-rated adventures in this tale, which is kind of surprising for a work from 1490. So, you have to square it with that. It's like, I mean, I know I come from a culture where not too long ago in the kind of soap opera land, there's the whole thing about Luke and Laura. And apparently how Luke and Laura met up at the first place, this is me doing secondhand, is he raped her. But then later on, they have a big romantic wedding and stuff like that, which is crazy, but that is something that has happened within the 20th century. So looking back a little bit further, maybe it's not surprising that this kind of, what you look at today is quite horrific. He's like, oh, this is where a lot of our horrific attitudes are reflected in. It's how far back in history of our Western culture of what chivalric love goes. Oh, this is the kind of stuff. It's like, she resists you, you just pursue her. If she resists you, you just kind of force the matter and just make her. It's like, it's quite horrific. It's valuable, I would argue, to read this sort of stuff and to kind of like go, oh, when people talk about knights and stuff like that, think about that maybe this stuff is included is in grandfathered in there, hidden, lurking in the background, but this work is old enough that it's actually, no, it's upfront and explicit enough that it's like you get that gets revealed to you, which I think is a good thing. It is also a book that is as much as you can say it is sexy. I mean, all these characters, it's one of these weird things of, if this was cast now, they would all be in their like 20s, but because it's in these 1490, everyone's like a teenager or a young teenager, to the point where you're kind of like, that would be kind of really awkward in our own times. I have to take it from, there wasn't particularly as much of the concept of childhood at this point, that people died a lot sooner. I mean, I know it's not as, we have this whole thing of everyone was dead by they were 40, but it's like, no, a lot of people died in their very much infancy, but age of consent and all that sort of things were in different places. It's like, all the squicky kind of weird things that you get from a book like this, where you have to think, oh, these are young teenagers doing this, which is like horrific. All the murder as well as all the sex. I mean, put them both together. But there's funny but weird stuff. The Empress gets into a kind of a whole sexual affair with one of Tirant's friends, who the friend is also, it's like a teenager, and this is presumably the Empress is a full-grown woman, and they're having kind of a hot and heavy love affair. The Emperor is keeps on fainting and being kind of fairly kind of just, I'm so fragile as an emperor. What the hell's going on? There are exciting battles and trickery. There is a lot of stuff where it's like Tirant's like, oh, I should be doing this exciting battle, but I really love this person, and I broke my leg, so I can't go out to the battle. It's like, because you were messing around with Carmenisa. It's like, it is a hilarious, it is a funny book. As well as it is, I think. I'm reading this is me reading I should have said this at the very beginning. I'm reading an abridged version of Tirant LeBlanc. This was written by I think Robert Rudder, who he wrote it around the same time that a full version was released, and he kind of left it in his drawer. He finally released it on Project Gutenberg in 1995, and it's abridged because the medieval sources, the medieval tales would always have like long kind of like essays and diatribes and like, little informative things, which really bulk this thing out. This thing is apparently about a quarter, because he's basically just given us the narrative side of things. This work is about a quarter of the length that it would actually be. So you also have to take, I'm doing baby's version of Tirant LeBlanc. I think I would actually be interested to see a full version of Tirant LeBlanc. I'd just kind of look through it and see exactly how thick and impenetrable perhaps those other sections, maybe how illuminating they were, of like, proper ways to be a knight, or, discourses, religious discourses, all that sort of kind of, educational data that was also there. So yeah, Tirant LeBlanc, a work that is I can see why someone like Don Quixote or would have it in his library, why it is a wealth of pleasure and a gold mine of amusement, because it indeed is that. It's also kind of a source of a lot of dark stuff in there, attitudes towards consent, towards attitudes towards the other. Like, if you're not a Christian, you're not really a human being. You're something that can be disposed of as an object, which is something that, as I said in the context of me reading and then reviewing this, is like there is a lot of Islamophobia in modern day Canada today, which is carried through from obviously attitudes that are a lot older than our context today. And we live in a culture now where we actually all need to kind of respect ourselves and get along, even if we don't believe in the same stuff. And I think it's valuable to go back to kind of texts of where that wasn't in evidence, and to try and examine that and pull that apart. All right, that is my review of Tirant LeBlanc. More videos later.